Some mystery stories begin with strange disappearances, others with whispered names or unmarked graves. But this one begins with a voice. A female voice, trembling and wet, recorded on an unlabeled reel-to-reel tape, buried in the archive basement of Southridge University. The box was misfiled. Claire Maddox had no business finding it, but curiosity is a dangerous guide, especially for someone who has never known when to stop. The voice spoke slowly in an accent that didn't match any region. Claire recognized, repeating only one line. "I wasn't supposed to die there, but no one remembered to pull me back." As the tape hissed, Claire replayed the line again and again, drawn deeper into the words like they were meant for her. When she searched the catalogue number, she found nothing, just a torn envelope inside the box with 5 handwritten words. Black Hollow Lake. Don't return alone. She had never heard of the lake, and it wasn't on any official maps. But something in that voice felt familiar, ancient, like an echo from a memory that didn't belong to her. Welcome to Stories in Shadows, where not every lake reflects and not every grave forgets. Claire couldn't explain the pull, but it grew stronger each hour. The more she tried to ignore it, the more she saw it. A lake she'd never seen appeared in her dreams, dark and still with a single ripple, tracing endless circles. The next day, she visited the regional records office, where an elderly clerk looked startled when she asked about Black Hollow Lake. He said nothing, but slipped her a faded topographic map with one corner burned. The name had been scratched out, but the outline of the lake remained visible. Claire followed that shape to an abandoned trail north of Greyhaven, a town barely surviving with less than 200 people. Most of them didn't look up when she arrived, but one woman did. A gas station attendant with glassy eyes who stared and whispered, "You're not the first. She sank before you. She'll pull until someone chooses to finish what was started." The words felt rehearsed, automatic. Claire asked who sank, who's she, but the woman blinked like waking from sleep and asked if she needed gas. Claire said nothing. She just stared at the mountains and the trees and the road that led where no road should. The path to the lake was nearly invisible, swallowed by underbrush and fog. No official signage, no GPS pin. But Claire followed instinct and paper map, watching how the sun seemed to shift too quickly behind the trees, like it didn't want to linger. She finally arrived at a ridge where the lake revealed itself, a black mirror untouched by wind or wildlife. The silence was absolute but heavy, not peaceful, like sound had drowned there too. The water was too still, too perfect. Claire saw her reflection, but it blinked a moment too late, and she stumbled back. Suddenly the voice from the tape played in her mind clearer. Now I wasn't supposed to die there, but no one remembered to pull me back. She found a rock jutting from the shore, and carved into it were deep scratches, not random, but deliberate, like someone trying to dig their way out beneath the moss. She uncovered a name, barely legible, Ilara. Nothing else, just that one name. Claire whispered it aloud, and the lake rippled. Once, then went still again. But this time, she swore it was holding its breath. Claire set up camp near the shore, though every instinct told her not to stay past dusk. Her recorder glitched constantly, picking up static that layered with faint female humming, even when the device was off. She documented the symbols carved into the rocks around the lake. They weren't writing, not letters but patterns, spirals and mirrored crescents like water remembering itself. Wrong shapes, she thought. shapes meant for reflection, not language. That night her dreams turned into drowning. She woke coughing lungs full of air that tasted like silt and rain. She checked her boots. They were soaked. The fire had gone out, but the ashes were still warm. Her notebook was open, but the pages were rewritten. Her handwriting, but words she didn't remember writing. Water has memory. She read aloud, aloud. The echo came back as three voices overlapping her own. Claire packed her bag at dawn, but the lake had risen overnight, swallowing the path she came in from. Now she was alone with the water, and the water remembered her. Desperate to leave, Claire tried bushwhacking east, toward higher ground, but the forest looped on itself, trees repeating stumps she'd already marked with ribbon appearing again, on the wrong side. Every time she stopped to breathe, the silence pressed in tighter, until she heard it, dripping, not from rain, but footsteps, something wet, following slowly, not behind her but beneath her. The ground had softened, becoming sponge-like, and when she turned sharply, she saw the faint outline of a woman standing waist-deep in the lake, head bowed, arms still. The figure didn't move, but the reflection in the water looked directly at Claire. It smiled, but the mouth was wrong, too wide too. Knowing, she blinked, and the woman was gone, but the ripple kept spreading. She ran back to camp, but her tent had collapsed under weight. It wasn't designed to hold. In its place, the reel-to-reel tape recorder sat playing on its own. The same voice again, but now changed. I was never buried. Claire, you brought me back. And then a second voice behind her breathing. I only needed one to remember. Claire didn't remember falling asleep, but she woke just before dawn, her back aching, her fingers blue from cold. The recorder had stopped spinning, yet the tape inside had rewound by itself. As she opened it, the reel was blank. No hiss, no voice, no trace of the message she swore she heard the night before. Just silence, like the machine had devoured its own memory. She climbed toward the hilltop to try and call for help, but her phone was dead, not drained, just black, like it had never been turned on at all. When she reached the clearing above the lake, she saw something new. A structure barely rising above the surface, like a stone crypt, sunken and split in two. One half remained exposed with steps descending into water. The other half was lost beneath the black. She took a photo, but the screen showed nothing but static. The image shimmered for a moment, then reset to her lock screen. Her reflection on the dark glass stared back, but its eyes were already looking somewhere else. The crypt had been waiting, and the lake had chosen her. Claire just didn't understand for what purpose. Yet back in town, Claire tried to speak to the woman at the gas station again, but the building was closed, lights off, shelves empty. A handwritten sign in the window read, "Close for Remembrance Day." No one she asked had heard of such a holiday. When she tried to leave Greyhaven, the road looped back in a perfect circle, placing her right where she started. Not by navigation error, but by environmental refusal. Like the town had locked in place just long enough to keep her within reach. At the library, a teenage girl behind the desk looked up and said, "You're the one from the lake, right?" Claire froze and asked what she meant, but the girl only smiled and handed her a book wrapped in string. It had no title, just a burned leather cover. Inside were handwritten pages, not printed, not scanned, old ink smeared from water damage. One page had a drawing that stole her breath. A woman submerged, tangled in roots, her mouth open as if still screaming, and beneath the sketch a line of text, Alara Maddox, sealed 1893. Claire's stomach turned. Her last name wasn't a coincidence, it was a return. She fled the library, but the book stayed in her hands no matter where she dropped it, always reappearing in her bag or beside her on benches. Its presence was an anchor, not just physical, but mental. Her thoughts began repeating themselves, and dreams invaded daylight. She couldn't remember what she had eaten or whether she had at all. When she checked her student ID, the photo had changed. Her hair was wet, her eyes unfocused. Her name had become Alara Claire, Alara Maddox. Like the lake had begun correcting history around town. She saw faces looking at her with quiet recognition. But no one said anything. They just watched like spectators at a ritual, already in progress. The lake wasn't a place. It was an inheritance. And Alara hadn't been waiting for discovery. She had been waiting for a body that could remember her fully. The whispers returned, not from ghosts, but from water and soil and old stone. They didn't plead. They instructed. She needs to be finished so she can be forgotten. Claire understood that now. The tomb wasn't meant to be found because whoever found it became its next seal. Determined to break the pattern, Claire returned to the lake just before nightfall. She brought rope and diving gear, and the cursed book wrapped in plastic. She followed the curve of the shore to where the steps descended into water. The moment her boots touched the first step, the temperature dropped. The wind stilled. The surface of the lake became perfectly flat, like a mirror turned inward. She descended slowly, each step grown in underweight, not hers alone. As she reached waist level, her vision blurred, then cleared, and she saw beneath the water, not her legs, but another pair, pale, bloated, bound in rusted chains. The reflection was not her, but Alara. Smiling as if seeing home, Claire dove. Before she reached the crypt, her lungs screamed and her ears rang. But she kept pushing down past the silt and carved symbols glowing faintly in the dark, until her hand touched stone and the door opened with no force. A coffin waited inside, full of water, full of hair, full of teeth, not floating but suspended like the moment of drowning caught in permanent memory. And Alara opened her eyes. Claire didn't remember swimming back. Only the sound of water breathing, like lungs beneath her. The fire she'd built earlier had reignited, and the recorder now sat beside it again, spinning steadily. This time, the voice was clearer, more confident. You made it further than the others. I almost remember what it's like to be me. Claire crawled to the edge of the lake and vomited water and weeds. Her arms bore bruises in the shape of hands. She flipped open the book and found a new page freshly written. A signature, Alara Maddox 2025. Claire's body froze. Her own hand was wet with ink. She hadn't written it, or maybe she had. She screamed, but no sound came, just bubbles. The lake had entered her lungs again. She checked the mirror on her phone for her reflection and found nothing. Just the lake, just the tomb, and her voice saying, "We finished together, this time, not alone." And the recording ended with a single sound, a heartbeat underwater, still beating. Claire stayed by the lake as night fell, unwilling to close her eyes, unsure which voice might speak next. The fire had burned low but did not die, even as the wind moved through the trees like whispers. She wrapped herself in a blanket and tried to read the book again, but now the pages were blank, every one of them, as if the act of opening the tomb had reset the record. She stood to search for signal and saw something strange. A trail of wet footprints leading away from the water, but not toward her camp. They headed into the trees, barefoot and small. Claire followed, flashlight trembling in her hand. The air grew colder, and every beam of light caught floating particles like ash, suspended in memory. The footprints stopped at a tree, not remarkable, except for the carving at its base, a circle with a single line through it. She had seen it before, etched into the coffin door. She placed her hand against the mark, and a vibration passed through her skin. Not pain, not heat, but something like recognition. A voice behind her said softly, "Do you remember now?" She turned, but no one was there, only the trees and the fog and a growing hum, like wind caught inside stone. She backed away, and the hum followed her, rising just beneath her ears. The fire at camp was gone when she returned, but the recorder still spun. The reel had no tape, but it turned as if driven by inertia. She checked her bag and found the book had returned and was now heavier, soaked through but sealed with a ribbon. She did not remember tying. The dream came before she closed her eyes, not after a woman walked backward into the lake dragging something behind her. A chain, a mirror, a child. It changed each time. The woman turned once, and Claire saw her own face, lip-stitched eyes full of someone else's grief. She woke to find her hands submerged in the lake without realizing she had moved. The water was warm now, pulsing around her wrists. She pulled them back, and on her palms were words not written, but stained. "Remember for me before they bury me." Again. In the morning, Claire walked back into Greyhaven, but no one looked at her this time. They looked past her as if she were already fading. She returned to the library, but it had been boarded shut as though decades had passed since she last entered. She asked a man on the street what happened to the library, and he replied, "What library? There hasn't been one here since the fire." Claire backed away, heart racing, remembering the girl behind the desk. Her pale hands, the way she smiled without blinking. The girl hadn't blinked at all. She returned to the hill overlooking the lake and saw something that stopped her breath. Her own car parked at the far side, lights still on, keys in the ignition. But she had arrived on foot, had she? She crossed the field, fast heart pounding, but the car was cold, untouched, and inside the passenger seat was a note in her handwriting. "I was never supposed to come alone." The handwriting was hers, but the sentence was not. The lake had rewritten her, or maybe it had remembered too much. That night the dreams deepened. Claire walked through a house she had never seen, but somehow knew. The walls dripped lake water, and every mirror held someone else's face. Alara as a child, Alara screaming, Alara silent and hollow. Claire tried to speak in the dream, but her mouth filled with silt. She awoke coughing, the taste of brackish water thick in her throat. The fire again burned, though she had not lit it, and beside it sat the book, reopened to a page she could not ignore. The page showed a sketch of a tomb, submerged with arrows pointing outward, marked "Her voice, live still," and beneath that a single line, "Whoever hears it becomes her again." Claire closed the book, but the words stayed in her head, looping like a melody. She couldn't stop humming. She now knew she had not come to document anything. She had been called and chosen, not by accident, but by design. The tomb was not a place, it was an opening, and the lake had never drowned Alara. It had preserved her. Claire stood waist deep in the water as moonlight broke through the fog. her reflection perfectly still, even as the lake rippled. She whispered the name Alara, and the water answered, not with sound, but with motion. The current pulled outward, not inward, and revealed the stairs again, the crypt rising higher, now visible even from the ridge. The door at its base was opened not by force, but invitation. She stepped closer, but stopped when she saw the figure beside it. A woman with long hair, floating slightly skin-pale mouth stitched, but smiling. The figure did not move, but its reflection turned and walked away. Claire looked down, and her own reflection was gone. The surface now showed only the tomb from above, dark, wide, and patient. She backed away and saw new carvings on the rocks along the shoreline. Names, dates, all from women in different decades, all with the same last name, Maddox. The lake had waded through blood, through silence, through lineage. It did not need to chase. It only needed the next one to answer. Claire whispered again, Alara, and this time she heard herself reply. Claire awoke with soil under her fingernails and her mouth dry, as if she had been breathing underwater for hours. The lake was silent again, but not still. Its surface pulsed faintly like the skin of something sleeping. The carvings on the stones near her tent had grown overnight, new symbols appearing in neat rows, the same ones from the dreamhouse walls, spirals intersecting with crescent shapes, always pointing back toward the tomb. She took a photo, but the image blurred instantly as she looked closer at one carving. She saw it was not stone at all, but bone. A piece of rib, smooth and engraved. Claire turned it over and found her initials burned into the underside. Not etched, not painted, but part of the bone, as if it had always been hers. The air shifted and the trees whispered again. Not leaves, but syllables repeated like a chant. Maddox, Maddox, Maddox. Each voice layered over the last, until the sound became a vibration deep in her teeth and behind her eyes. She dropped the bone and it rolled into the lake without a splash, swallowed like it belonged. She returned to town, but the streets were empty. Cars still, but running, windows open. But no movement like life had paused for her passage. She reached the church and pushed through the heavy door, only to find the inside hollowed out pews, rotting altar burned, and on the wall behind it, dozens of framed photographs, all of the same woman standing beside the lake in different years. Her face shifted in each image, but her eyes remained constant, black and distant. Below each frame was a name none matching, but all ending in Maddox. Claire ran her fingers across one, and the glass cracked from center outward. She turned to leave and heard something drop. A key landed beside her, old brass curved like a question mark tied to a ribbon, the same ribbon that had sealed the book. She took it, and behind her, the photographs fell one by one, like dominoes, and the whisper followed again. This time, you finish it. Claire ran, but the sound followed, not chasing her, but arriving ahead, waiting around every corner, until it was no longer a voice, but her own thought. Back at the lake, the tomb had risen further, now fully visible even without descending into the water. Stone steps led downward into darkness. The doorway opened like a wound. She entered with the key in her hand, unsure if it unlocked anything at all. The air inside was still wet but warm, like breath trapped underground. The walls were covered in handprints, some small, some impossibly large, some missing fingers. At the center of the chamber sat a chair, not a coffin, not a shrine, but a simple wooden chair facing a mirror. The mirror was cracked and fogged, But when Claire stepped in front of it, she saw not a face, but Alara's seated in the chair behind her. Claire turned, but the chair was empty. She turned back, and Alara now stood within the mirror, mouth unstitched, eyes clear and sad. She raised a hand and pressed it to the glass, and Claire, without meaning to, did the same. The moment their fingers met, her vision exploded into images. Fire drowning, screaming roots wrapping around ankles, and that final voice. Again, the one on the tape saying, "I was never meant to die alone." Claire stumbled backward from the mirror, but the chair was no longer empty. A figure now sat upright, skin-pale veins, visible like rivers beneath ice. Eyes closed, but breathing shallowly like sleep had not yet ended. Her hair floated slightly, though there was no wind, and around her neck was the same ribbon that had tied the key. Claire approached slowly, each step pressing into soft earth though the floor was stone. When she leaned in close, she heard the woman whisper something too faint to understand. Claire bent lower, and this time the words were clear. "If I wake, I become you. If I sleep, you become me." Claire tried to speak, but her voice failed. The book in her pack began to burn, not with flame, but with light. The words on its pages glowing and rising into the air, forming a spiral above them. As the last word lifted, Claire saw. It was her name fully written, not printed, not signed, but formed from hundreds of overlapping lines, all shaped by her own hand. She looked back at the figure in the chair, but she was gone. The mirror showed only Claire now sitting and breathing, as if she had never stood. Claire woke in her tent just before dawn, rain falling gentle and steady. The lake was flat again, and the tomb gone, as if it had never risen. Her clothes were dry, her bag untouched, and the recorder silent. She stood and walked to the water's edge, her reflection calm for the first time since she arrived. But something beneath the surface shimmered, not movement but form, a face faint and distant drifting slowly upward. She reached for a stone and skipped it once, twice before it sank, and the image vanished. She checked her phone and found one new photo in her gallery, the mirror in the tomb and her own eyes looking out, but they weren't hers anymore. The irises too dark, the expression too knowing. The photo was time-stamped 20 minutes into the future. Her breath caught, and she turned toward the trail, ready to leave, ready to forget. But behind her, the water whispered again. Not a name, not a demand, just a presence waiting. She stepped forward but paused. 1 foot in the lake, 1 foot on land. She did not yet know which direction she belonged. Claire took the trail out of Greyhaven, but each turn fed into another, like a maze drawn by hand and altered every time she blinked. The forest had grown denser since the day before, or maybe it had leaned inward, branches arching like ribs closing over her. Each landmark shifted stones, realigned signs vanished. The compass in her hand spun uselessly. She turned back, hoping to find the lake again, but the air grew colder and the ground softer, until her boots sank slightly with every step. Finally she arrived at a clearing and saw herself standing there, not a reflection, not a vision, but an exact double, staring back with the same expression. The twin tilted her head and spoke with Claire's voice. "You are not lost. You are layered." Claire backed away, but the forest had closed behind her. Trees pressed in like bodies, and her double stepped forward, not walking, but floating just above the soil. The closer she came, the more the air hummed, not with menace but with welcome. And then she said the sentence that froze Claire's breath. "She drowned so we could be remembered." Claire's double reached out a hand and Claire felt the cold before contact. The fingers passed through her shoulder and the cold traveled straight to her spine. She collapsed, knees buckling vision, flashing white, and then she was somewhere else. Not a forest, not a lake, but a long hallway filled with mirrors. Each one showed her at different ages, crying, laughing, sleeping, drowning. In one mirror, Alara appeared older than she had ever, looked pale and regal like something preserved, not aged. Claire walked the hall and each step erased the mirror behind her. When she reached the end, there was no door, only a final panel of black glass. She touched it and sank through without resistance, falling into cold again, but not water. The sensation was memory trying to drag her under, not to kill her, but to keep her. She landed in the crypt again, standing at the foot of the chair where Alara sat breathing as before. But this time she opened her eyes. They were not black, but entirely white, glowing faintly. Alara spoke without moving her lips. "Do you want to forget, or do you want to finish?" Claire wanted to ask, "Finish what?" But her mouth stayed closed, her body no longer her own. She moved only when Alara blinked, and each blink carried her deeper into something old and endless. She saw the first drowning, not her own, not Alara's, but someone before them. A woman chased from a burning house carrying a child. She threw the child into the lake, not to kill, but to hide, and the lake took her instead. The child lived and returned, and when she died, the lake remembered her too. Every Maddox, every woman tied to that name had been drawn back by water, by voice, by legacy. Claire now understood the tomb was not a burial. It was a chamber of memory, and Alara was only the latest name, not the origin. Claire saw her mother briefly in the next vision, not speaking, just walking the edge of the lake, unaware that she too had passed something down Claire's hands, moved to the ribbon around her neck, and when she pulled it free, the air around her shook like a bell struck underwater. Alara closed her eyes and said, "Now you choose." Claire was back on the shore, standing knee-deep in the lake, sunlight broken into silver fragments on the surface. Her hands were dry but shaking. The forest behind her had grown quiet, and the air felt thin, like everything around her was holding a breath. The book had returned to her bag, its pages now full and unburned. She opened it and saw each chapter written in a different hand, each telling the same story differently. Some names changed, some dates shifted, but always ending the same with the phrase, "The lake remembers those who try to forget." A new page had begun, but was still blank, except for one line. Would you become the seal or break it? Claire looked to the water and saw the tomb submerged once more, only its top visible like a warning or a promise. She stepped closer, heart steady now, no longer confused, only heavy. She reached for the surface and the ripple met her palm, warm and slow. She whispered aloud, "I am not you, but I remember you." And the lake finally answered in her voice, "Welcome home." Claire stayed at the water's edge as the sun passed overhead, unmoving for hours. The townspeople never came looking. No one called her name. No one remembered she had arrived. She felt her body light and distant, like it might drift away at any moment. The recorder beside her clicked once, then stopped and the fire near her tent went out, though no wind touched it. She opened the book to the first page again, and now it bore her name in thick ink. Claire Maddox, daughter of Alara, keeper of the last line. The tomb no longer pulsed beneath the surface. It slept fully sealed but not destroyed. Her phone turned on by itself and showed one photo, not from her gallery, but from someone else's. A woman, standing where Claire stood now, with the lake behind her and the caption, "She was the last to forget." Claire closed the phone and placed it on the stone beside her. She did not need it anymore. Somewhere in the woods, a bird sang for the first time in days, and the lake did not answer. It only listened. Claire wandered the shoreline for hours, though the sky never changed. Light hung above the trees like a painting, backlit but motionless. Time bent here, or perhaps folded in upon itself. At one point she came upon her own footsteps, looping perfectly around the lake, meeting where they started. She sat on a stone bench that hadn't been there before, etched with the symbol she had seen in the crypt, a circle split by a vertical line. Her fingertips brushed the carving, and the air shifted. A familiar voice began speaking, not aloud, but inside her mind. It was Alara, softer now, almost kind. "You can leave, Claire, but only if someone else stays." Claire clenched her jaw, trying to block it out, but the voice grew louder. The lake had always given choices. It just never gave clean ones. She stood again, and the forest around her opened slightly, revealing a figure standing at the tree line. A young girl, no more than 16, with dark eyes and bare feet, watching silently. Claire called out, but the girl did not respond. She only pointed toward the lake, then vanished without sound, like memory leaving the edge of a dream. Claire followed the path where the girl had stood and found a trail she had never seen. Stones formed a walkway just beneath the moss, old and deliberate. At the end stood a small shrine, built from broken branches and red string surrounding a glass jar. Inside was a ribbon, the same color as the one from her dreams, tied in a perfect knot. She lifted the jar, and a gust of wind pushed through the clearing. The trees groaned, and a low hum began from the lake behind her. She turned and saw the tomb again, but this time it was not rising. It was opening. Stone peeled back like petals folding inward, and mist poured out thick and slow as breath. Claire stepped toward it, unable to stop herself, drawn by a heat inside the fog that reminded her of fever and grief. As she reached the edge, a memory surged uninvited. Alara kneeling in a wooden church, blood on her hands, whispering, "I did not ask for this. They buried me before I drowned." Claire whispered back, "I remember now," and the tomb fell silent like it was waiting. The inside of the tomb had changed. No longer a simple stone chamber, but a cathedral of roots and glass. Its walls pulsed with dim light, and in each section, Claire saw fragments of lives not hers, but familiar. A woman brushing her daughter's hair before disappearing into the lake. A girl tying ribbons into tree branches as if marking a path for someone who never arrived. A hand pressed to the mirror, not in terror, but in longing. Claire walked past each memory until she reached the center where the chair once sat. Now it was gone. In its place lay a pool of water, perfectly still and black. She knelt beside it and saw her reflection shift between her face and Alara's, then another's and another's, until the faces became blurred, like all had been overlaid and none could separate. Claire touched the surface, and it did not ripple. Her hand passed through and she felt nothing, just weightlessness. Below the surface, a single word formed in the dark, etched in red light. "Choose." Claire pulled her hand back, and the pool evaporated instantly. The voices returned, all hers, all Alara's, all Maddox's. The ceiling of the tomb cracked above her, and moonlight spilled in, though she did not recall it being night. Her body trembled with something between exhaustion and clarity. The book returned to her hands, open to its final page blank. She could feel the pen, though she had not brought one, and in her mind, the words began to form, not from thought, but from blood. She watched as her hand moved on its own, writing a single sentence over and over. I remember, because she never could. I remember because she never could. Claire dropped the book, and it snapped shut, the sound echoing like a door closing. She stood in the tomb, began to collapse, not violently, but with purpose. The walls folded, the fog receded, the mist cleared. She walked upward, as if lifted not by steps, but by release. Each movement peeled back, something inside her, a layer of silence, a fragment of echo, a shard of fear. At the top, she stood again by the lake, but this time the water did not move. The reflection did not watch. The air no longer hummed. The question had already been answered. Claire sat beneath the same tree where her tent had once stood, but there was no tent, no recorder, no fire, only her and the lake and the wind that finally moved. She looked down at her hands and saw they were clean. No markings, no bruises, no ink. But inside she felt a presence, not foreign, not invasive, but old and resting. She opened the book one final time and found only a map inside, drawn by hand with a path marked not to the tomb, but away from it. A red line curling toward a town she had never heard of, and a single note beside it. It begins again, where no one remembers. She closed the book and placed it beneath the tree, then stood and walked without looking back. The forest opened before her, not like it had before, but like it had been waiting. A new voice rose behind her, not Alara, not hers, just something gentle and unnamed. And the lake exhaled slowly for the first time in a century. Claire stepped back into the world she remembered, but the edges were wrong. The trees looked familiar, but older. The signs on the road bore her town's name, but in a different typeface. At a gas station, she recognized the layout, but not the attendant. He greeted her with a kind smile and asked if she needed directions. Claire stared at him and asked the date he told her, and she froze. 3 months had passed since the day she arrived at Black Hollow Lake. He offered her a coffee on the house, and she nodded, but said nothing. Her hands trembled around the cup. The warmth didn't reach her skin. She checked her phone again. No service, but the clock was working now and ticking slightly out of sync. As she looked at the screen, her reflection flickered, showing not just her, but a flash of Alara behind her eyes. When she blinked, it was gone, but the feeling stayed. Someone had followed her, or something had not finished, and the lake was no longer where she left it. She knew because she checked every map, and there was no mention of Black Hollow anywhere anymore. Back at her apartment, Claire found her furniture covered in dust, as if no one had been there in years. Her voicemail was full with missed calls from a number she didn't recognize. All the messages were the same. A woman's voice whispering, "It's still open close. It before it sees someone else." She opened her laptop and tried to pull up her thesis notes, but the files were corrupted. Every folder labeled Black Hollow returned only a single image. A still of the crypt submerged with the reflection of someone standing at its base. It wasn't her, at least not completely. The shape was right, but the posture was different still and composed like someone waiting. Her dreams returned immediately that night. The forest, the water, the book now burning itself shut again. In the mirror, she saw herself brushing her hair, but her arm never moved. Her body was back, but her mind was echoing. Alara wasn't gone. She had just been transferred. Claire had never escaped. The lake. She had become its story. Claire returned to Southridge University hoping for clarity, but the anthropology wing, where she once studied, had been relocated. The old archive was sealed behind caution tape labelled structural instability. She asked a professor she had once worked with about the Maddox collection, but he only looked confused and said, "No one ever filed a Maddox case here. The room you worked in was emptied out years ago." She asked him if he remembered her at all. He hesitated, then nodded slowly, as if recovering something buried. Claire left quietly and walked across campus where no one seemed to recognize her. Some smiled, but their eyes passed over her like wind over glass. The sunlight felt heavier now, and shadows clung longer than they should. When she sat at a bench, the trees around her shifted subtly, closing in like a heartbeat. She closed her eyes and heard the tape again. The first line Alara ever spoke. "I was never supposed to die there, but no one remembered to pull me back." And now Claire understood. She was no longer someone who remembered. She was someone who carried memory for those who never would. Claire took the train to a nearby town, one she had never visited before. She stepped off and found a bench near the edge of a quiet square where children played and old men read newspapers. She watched them all carefully, waiting for something familiar. And finally she saw it. A girl, no older than 10, skipping rope, humming a tune Claire knew, but had never sung aloud. The lullaby from the lake. The girl stopped and stared at her for a long time, then pointed toward a narrow alley. Claire stood and followed, finding at the end a wall covered in names scratched faintly into brick. Near the bottom, she saw hers, not Claire, but Alara, and a date, 4 days from now. She ran her fingers over it, and the brick beneath gave way, revealing a hollow space with a sealed envelope addressed to the one who returned. Inside was a single page and a key, not brass but glass, translucent and cold. The note read, "You closed one door but left another unlocked. Return if ready, rewrite if not." She tucked the key into her coat and walked away, but every step felt like it echoed in water. That night she stayed in a motel on the edge of the highway, the kind with buzzing lights and empty lots. The television played static, even when unplugged, and the mirror above the sink was fogged. Though there had been no shower, she wiped it clean and saw her face staring back. But behind her again, that flicker of someone else, Alara in a wedding dress, eyes blank, mouth moving in reverse. Claire turned sharply, but the room was empty. She lay in bed but could not sleep. The key pulsed in her pocket, a faint rhythm against her chest like a second heartbeat. She finally stood at 3 in the morning and opened the door, stepping into cold wind and silence. Across the road, a trail had formed, one not there before, lined with broken branches and red string. Claire followed it barefoot, not feeling the frost. And as she reached the end, she saw it again. The lake, wide, dark, waiting. Not where it had been, but always where it needed to be. She had left it, but it had not left her. And now she was the one it would whisper through. Claire stood at the edge of the new lake, its water unmoving, yet breathing as if the ground itself exhaled beneath her feet. The sky above showed stars, but none she recognized. They were bent slightly off pattern, rearranged like a code reset in her absence. The trees around the shore leaned inward, not ominous, but reverent. As she stepped forward, the water lit faintly beneath her bare feet, each ripple forming a symbol she'd seen before in the crypt. The lake was responding not to her presence, but to her memory, not what she thought, but what she refused to forget. She waded deeper, and the reflections around her shifted, no longer mirrors, but portals showing other women across time, all with her eyes, some running, some drowning, one screaming without sound. Claire closed her eyes and whispered the name she no longer feared. Alara, and the water opened like a curtain, revealing a stairway made of bone and glass. She stepped down without hesitation, now knowing this was not a haunting, but a reclamation. She had not been chosen. She had returned by inheritance. The steps descended farther than they should, deeper than the lake should allow. But Claire never struggled for breath, nor did she feel cold. Her body felt weightless, as though memory itself carried her. She entered a chamber, not stone this time, but flesh and shadow. The walls moved slightly, and along them ran veins of light, pulsing slow and steady. In the center of the room sat a cradle large and ancient, woven from willow and hair, rocking on its own. Inside was a book, closed tight with a lock made of teeth. Her key no longer fit, because this lock was not for her to open. It required surrender, not action. A voice rose from behind her, not in air, but inside her lungs. The same voice that had guided her since the first tape. I was never finished. Claire, not because they forgot me, but because they remembered the wrong parts. Claire placed her hand on the cradle, and it stopped rocking. The book inside began to bleed ink, soaking the cradle from within. The voice whispered again, "This is not your memory. It is what memory needs you to be." Claire stepped back and watched the ink spread until the cradle collapsed inward, pages unraveling into long ribbons of writing. Each line carried fragments of different voices, stitched into a singular story. They were not all Alara's. Some were women Claire had never known and yet recognized intuitively. One line read, "I could not scream, so I sang." One read, "I could not leave, so I slept." One read, "I was never real," until someone remembered Claire's name, appeared again this time, etched into the air, not paper. Each letter suspended before her, then passed through her chest without pain. Her heart beat once, loudly, then stilled for a moment as the ink gathered around her ankles, not threatening, but welcoming. It climbed her legs like mist curling with familiarity. As it reached her waist, she whispered the truth aloud. I never escaped, because I was never outside. She opened her eyes and saw the surface of the lake above her, but did not swim upward. The water bent around her like glass, folding her into its story, not as a prisoner, but as a chapter waiting to be read. When she rose from the lake, the world had shifted again. She stood not on moss, but marble, not beside a forest, but a quiet grey shore stretching into fog. People stood in rows, facing the water, unmoving, silent, their faces empty like unlit candles. One stepped forward, an old woman who pressed her hand to Claire's cheek and said, "We could not rest, because we were never named. You are the last name." The others bowed their heads and faded into mist, and with them went the pain. Claire did not feel lighter, only clearer, like the weight had been rearranged. She opened her palm and found the tooth key again, but now it glowed faintly with soft red light. She held it up, and the air fractured before her, revealing a doorway of lake water suspended in midair. At its threshold stood Alara, fully formed, no longer fragmented. Her face was calm and her eyes warm. She stepped aside and motioned Claire through. Claire crossed without hesitation, and the doorway closed behind her, not as a trap, but as a seal. She was no longer the girl who searched for truth. She was the guardian of forgetting. Claire sat by a new lake, one not on any map, surrounded by fog, but at peace. The book in her lap no longer burned or bled. Each page held a name, a date, a line of memory. She did not write them. They came to her like dreams from strangers. Some pages were blank, still waiting, and she let them be. She looked to the water and saw only her reflection, calm, scented, whole. The tomb was gone, or perhaps she had become it. The town of Greyhaven had vanished in every registry, and the path that once led her there now opened into new forests, ones no one had ever walked, and still the lake waited, not for revenge, not for salvation, but for the one who would listen. Claire whispered gently, "I am here now," and that was enough. The wind blew softly, and for the first time in the story, no voice replied. Only silence and the slow ripple of a surface that no longer needed to remember, because someone had finally chosen to carry the forgetting. Claire sat at the lake's edge where the water met stone, the book still open in her lap. Pages fluttered slowly, though no wind touched them. Each name written on the paper began to glow softly one by one, fading into the parchment as if absorbed into memory. Not erased, only settled. She watched in silence until the final name appeared. Claire Ilara Maddox. The ink paused before sinking as if the story waited for her permission. She closed the book and stood letting the weight in her chest pull downward, like roots anchoring her in place. She stepped to the water and saw no reflection this time, only light rippling outward with each breath. As she walked along the shoreline, faces began to emerge, not physical, but impressions. Impressions of the women who had come before, some smiling, some hollow, all watching. Her steps did not echo, and her shadow did not follow. Her name had been written, and with that, the lake accepted her fully, but acceptance was not the same as survival. One final ripple crossed the surface, and the voice returned soft and distant. "Do you wish to remember, or be remembered?" The voice did not repeat. It only asked once. Claire stood motionless. Her feet submerged, the water rising slowly, not dragging her under, but offering. She thought of the girl skipping rope, the one who had pointed the way, and wondered if that child would return here in another life, in another name. She thought of the photograph she found in the wall and the blank expressions of those who had been sealed too soon. Claire understood now that memory was a burden, not a gift. It pressed until it either buried you or became part of your breath. The tomb had not drowned Alara, it had given her form. The house was not haunted, the lake was not cursed. These were places made to hold what could not be forgotten. Claire looked down at the key still in her hand, its glow dimming as her decision formed, slowly, wordlessly, with no need to speak. She dropped it into the lake, and it vanished without sound. The water responded, not with violence, but stillness, as if the answer had always been waiting to be spoken without words. Claire walked away from the lake barefoot, the earth cold but forgiving. The forest around her no longer bent inwards, no longer whispered or shifted. The trees simply stood breathing their own slow rhythm. She reached a clearing where the red strings had once hung, now unraveled, lying across the ground like veins cut free. A bird watched her from a low branch and did not fly when she approached. It tilted its head and began to hum, not sing, not chirp, but hum the lullaby from the cradle. Claire smiled softly, not in joy, but in understanding. She had not won, and nothing had been destroyed. She had simply chosen to carry the weight consciously. Now the lake did not need to call again. Not yet. Not soon. She left behind no markers, no trail, and when she glanced back, the trees had closed the path entirely. Her feet bled slightly from stone and frost, but the pain grounded her, held her to the present. One name, remembered, was enough to silence the others, even for a time. Back in the town she never meant to return to, Claire found a bench outside the shuttered post office and waited. She had no purpose, no destination, but something inside her knew to sit. She watched people pass, and none looked her way until a man approached. Not old, not young, wearing a coat she recognized from her first day in Greyhaven, though she had never met him. He sat beside her without speaking and held out a paper folded in half. She opened it and read a name she did not know, followed by a location not listed on any map. She turned to him, but he was already standing, already walking away. The paper felt warm in her hand, pulsing slightly like the key once had. She folded it carefully and placed it between the pages of the book, which had returned without notice beside her feet. The book no longer felt heavy. It felt ready. The path she had sealed was not the only one. Memory would always find a new mouth to live in, and now someone else had been named. That night, Claire lit no fire. She sat beneath the stars that no longer looked wrong and stared at the empty page where her own chapter had once begun. She took a pen from her coat pocket and wrote a single sentence. I was not her, but I carried her home. Then she closed the book gently and placed it beneath the bench, letting the wind carry whatever came next. She lay down beneath the trees and slept dreamlessly for the first time in her life. When morning came, the bench was empty. The book was gone, and the ground beneath it soft with moss, where footsteps once stood. The lake no longer whispered, and no birds sang. But there was peace, not because the story had ended, but because it had been told fully. There would be others. There always were. But for now, Claire was gone, and the tomb remained quiet, not forgotten, not feared, only remembered. The lake remained unseen for a long time, its water buried beneath seasons and silence. No map carried its name, and no road ever truly led there until someone needed to arrive, and someone always did. One autumn afternoon, a girl no older than 20 parked her car near a grove of crooked pines, looking for a trail her grandmother once described. She carried a notebook, leather-bound, marked only with a symbol she could not explain, a circle split by a vertical line. The forest welcomed her, not with whispers, but with stillness, and she followed its breath towards something she did not yet understand. Her eyes were not Claire's. Her name was not Maddox. But the lake did not need a name, only someone who would listen and someone who would stay. She reached the water's edge just before dusk, the sky fractured with pink and silver. The lake was perfectly flat, not inviting, not ominous, simply present. Her boots sank into the soil as she leaned forward, watching for movement. A breeze passed over the surface, and for a moment she thought she saw someone beneath it. Eyes open, hair floating slowly upward. She blinked, and the shape was gone, but something else remained. A ripple curved toward her without origin, and stopped just before it touched her toes. She opened the notebook and found only one page written. not by her hand, but in her voice. I did not come here to find. I came to remember. She closed it slowly, then looked to the center of the lake, where nothing waited and everything had already begun. That night, she dreamed of staircases and mirrors and lullabies. She saw a woman seated in a chair, eyes closed, mouth open in mid-sentence. A cradle rocked without hands. A page turned by unseen fingers, and a voice whispered, "Welcome back." Not because she had returned, but because the story had. She woke with tears on her face, but no sadness, only weight, the kind that roots a soul not down but inward. She sat at the edge of the lake until sunrise, unsure what came next, but knowing she would not leave just yet. A reflection blinked in sync with hers, and the wind shifted like a page in a book that had always known its ending. Somewhere far away in a town that had never known Black Hollow, a child opened a drawer and found a ribbon. She tied it in her hair without thinking and began humming a tune no one had taught her. In another city, a man woke from a dream of drowning and wrote the words, "She was never buried," only remembered into the margin of a report he would soon forget. Across quiet places, across names, and bloodlines and silence, the lake stretched not in distance but in reach. Claire was gone. Alara was sealed. The book had been closed. But the lake was eternal, not because it was immortal, but because someone had always chosen to remember, and someone had always failed to forget. Some stories never end. They wait quietly in the dark for someone curious enough to listen. If this story found you, perhaps it was meant to. Perhaps the lake is only still because someone is dreaming in your name. If you want more mystery, stories like this from Stories in Shadows, subscribe now and follow us into deeper waters. We tell tales that don't just scare you, they haunt you. Stay with us for more true horror, dark folklore, and twisted endings that echo long after silence returns. But be warned, once you enter, not all exits lead where you began.